Yeah, so African Americans were hired to, men particularly, all came to, this was all wooded area, and to chop down trees. Once manufacturers said, boy, you know, we could make a lot of money here on this river, the employers were having, I mean, listen, it was a great migration of cheap exploitable labor coming in from one group or another, and they chose to use those laborers as workers, with the threat, though, that if you all got out of line, we could easily bring in those black people from the South who will want to take your jobs. So those kinds of things were pushed in the employment fields all throughout Michigan, and not simply Grand Rapids, although it's very well Grand Rapids. So African Americans never had a firm foothold in the economic order at all, was trying to fight for that, and were just simply kept in, you know, the only place you could get work was the hotels or other things. And people did that, and they worked very hard, and some made very good livings at it. But it was not by choice. It was simply by necessity.
Somebody from the back now. The gentleman over there, if you could please stand. You, sir.
If I had the answer, I'd, you know, have $1 million. I've been trying to wonder that myself, but I think that, let me say this, Reverend McMurray, I think one of the things that African Americans have to do, and what we have to learn from our ancestors, is we have to create our own benevolent societies. And unfortunately, most of the foundation money around this town is marked for something that the people have given it for. And if you don't fit in that, you don't get those dollars. If you can't make, but we can raise our own money, and I think it may not be a lot of money, but we should be raising our own money to do that. And you know what? When you raise your own money, other people didn't want to join your money with their money, you know, and get that partnership thing going on. This lady over here, Jonathan.
The young lady over here to the left.
Oh, the Heart and Soul of Grand Rapids is a book about neighborhoods. Yes, that came out last year. And you know, I'm mentioning the credits because they wouldn't have known nothing about black folks if they hadn't talked to me.
We have a question from the upper deck now.
There was nothing in Michigan case law necessarily that merited Dred Scott's. For the audience, the case of Dred Scott was a slave. He came into Illinois with his slave master, and once in Illinois for a long period of time, he declared himself free. The United States Supreme Court ruled in that case that an African American, well, really wasn't American, and was not entitled to any rights under the U.S. Constitution. Roger B. Taney was the Supreme Court Justice from Maryland who ruled that case. but more to the point is that one of the interesting legacies of Michigan history in general is that Michigan did have slavery. It was grandfathered in because the French had slaves before Michigan was a part of the United States. And those slaves were grandfathered in, and that's an interesting part of Michigan history that we simply don't tell people, that slavery was an institution that influenced the shaping of our state. And like Illinois, where Dred Scott took place, slavery did have a deep influence on this state's history. Oh.
We'll go with the young woman in the front here.
Dr. Jelks, can you speak to the role of education in this problem, and particularly the institutional racism that exists?
Well, one of the things the question is about institutional racism in schooling, in education. I said to a class this morning that I was speaking to, most of the lawsuits that African Americans have filed in the U.S. Supreme Court have been around education. And long before Brown versus Education, Board of Education, African Americans were filing cases about the right having access to an education, or having their own schools funded properly, or having access to higher education. This is a long history that it irritates me to no end that people think this has happened only in 1954. This has been a long history since African Americans were free from slavery. And this access to education has been one that's been persistently blocked. Where African Americans and poor people are, not just simply African Americans, schools are underfunded. Where African Americans and poor people are, materials are old. So this has been a persistent problem, one that our community, Paul I. Phillips, in fact, in the early 50s wanted our community to address. And if we had addressed it in the 1950s, we might have been a much better community today. The discrepancies in education, it's just abominable. And no community ought to stand for that. Listen, Louisville, Kentucky, ain't the motto of progressiveness now. Made in Louisville, Kentucky, that's a southern state, made a county-wide school system so everybody would be invested into the school system on the public level. Give the people of Louisville some hand. We always looking down our nose at people in the South, but I bet you make a proposal like that, and if I did that in the Grand Rapids Press, we'd see a lot of letters about who is he to take over my school district. Rather than seeing that education is something that all children ought to have, we use all kinds of obfuscations about these issues